My name is Dean Merchant. I'm a local historian. I'm here with my wife Pam today, and we're at the site of the principal part of the incident at Exeter that occurred in Labor Day weekend, September 3rd, 1965. This is a very interesting location because there were three separate sightings that we know of that happened here that infamous night. The first was a fairly good-sized family that saw the brilliant red fireball, blood red UFO out here, over beyond the fences in here in the pasture land. And then at midnight, Norman Muscarello was thumbing home from his girlfriend's at Kensington, Amesbury, New Hampshire, just down the way there, and was coming along here, and he had a crimson blood red UFO come up over him the size of a football field, the size of a barn, and it turned the horse farm to this direction, blood red, as well as the dining farmhouse to the other side over here. And young Muscarello was so frightened he actually dove behind a stone wall. We're not sure, there's a little piece of stone wall here left. It's changed. There's a few newer homes in here. It took him a bit. He pounded on one of the the doors of one of the homes, and they didn't open up, fearing it was somebody who was drunk. But he did manage to flag down a car with a couple in it and hitch a ride into Exeter to the Exeter police station. So he came in pale as a ghost, trembling, trying to light a cigarette to tell his story about the occurrence out here on Route 150, which locals call a UFO alley. And as he was telling it to the sergeant at the desk, Reginald Scratch Tolan, Eugene Bertram, the toughest policeman on the Exeter police force, arrived. And he had just had an experience of two women out on Route 101 that runs from Manchester, New Hampshire, main road over to the seacoast to Hampton Beach area. And they had said they'd been chased by a red UFO, bright red light from Epping, about 10 miles down to Route 85, crosses on the road, and he found them there trembling and terrified, pulled off to the side. So he had taken their story, but that's kind of as far as it went until he got to the police station and heard young Muscarello's story. So he put young Muscarello into his car, 18-year-old, about to be a naval recruit, head off to the Navy, and they drove back up here. And they got out of the car. This was field here. There was a fence further back. And they started walking down into the field down below. You can see it's quite extensive. And didn't see a thing. And then all of a sudden, up from behind the tree line, far down in the back, and the trees were tall pines, kind of as they are now. I'm sure it's a different generation of those, but up came that red UFO, and it came towards them, and the brilliant bright red light flooded them. They were feeling they were going to be irradiated. Gene Bertram, the policeman, drew out his .38 service revolver, pointed at Skywood, thought better of that. He said young Muscarello was quite paralyzed, so he dragged the teenager back to his automobile. And but he said, he called into the station, and he said, I see the damn thing myself. At that same time, David Hunt, another patrolman, was on his way out. He joined the other two, and he also saw it a little bit more in the distance. It waved over the site here. It yawed. It floated like a leaf. Classic features of what people report in UFOs. And it was watched between Muscarello and Bertram for about 15 minutes. So the first family saw it at 10 o'clock in the evening. Muscarello at 12:30, back at 1:30, 2 o'clock came the policeman. So it was three incidents that we know of over a very prolonged period of time, and that was very unusual. And then it took off in the distance towards Hampton. There was a phone call into the police station from a man at a phone booth, terrified that the UFO was hovering over him. And when the police went to the phone booth, he was gone. But one of the parts of the mystery is people have wondered what's out beyond in this area. So we're going to walk out there today so people can get a look at the lay of the land. is an area where some think that the UFO will hide. Out in that area, there's also a power line. They think perhaps that there are power from. In this area, the UFO has been seen putting a silver tube out, touching the high tension lines over the years. So this kind of gives the background of where the UFO came up on the road, where the policeman, over Roman Muscarello, and now we'll head down a park and we'll walk in and see where perhaps it was hiding and waiting. We're filming in from the Route 150 a bit because of the noise from these. You can see the transmission lines up above. And as it pans around, you'll see that it's focusing over the power lines and out beyond what is called the Great Meadows, which is a very, very interesting, large meadow that's isolated. It backs up to Phillips Exeter Academy's Kensington lands, which we find very interesting, things UFO that ties into Phillips Exeter Academy. Out in here, in the Great Meadows, there's a stream that runs through. It's a terrific trout stream, what they would call native trout. They're a good-sized trout, about 10 to 12 inches long and fat, and as pink as a wild salmon. Have a population through there. That stream goes down and enters into the Exeter River, which follows along through the Phillips Exeter Academy woods, an area of a number of sightings and great curiosities, like the fact that Colonel Butch Blanchard of Roswell fame did his PG year here before entering the military academy and walked those paranormal grounds of strange highness, as they like to say, in those who study ufology. So we're going to follow parallel down to the power lines as we go, and coming out behind the horse farm. And for the first time, I think, you're going to get to see some very interesting terrain that not many have seen. Raymond Fowler, a well-known author of many, many books and bestsellers, arrived here a week or so after the incident, actually after he'd done his interviewing of the principal people. And he and his brother walked in along this line then. So there's been quite a long-term interest in this area. So I'm glad you can join me in seeing where everyone thinks that potentially that UFO would nestle down and hide, waiting. So as it's being panned, the Great Meadows, one can see the boggy area is dense. In New Hampshire, they're apt to call that kind of density in alders and thickness the pucker bush. But this was an area of great interest to the Abenaki people who resided in the area. There are a lot of resources. We can see cattails out there, which they somewhat considered their grocery store for most parts, from the tubers to the cattail flower, greens was usable by them. And nature changes, geology changes. At one time, this was much less wet than it is now, much more of a drier meadow. But as we learn now, the weather can change pretty quickly, and we've chosen to come out in February here on a record-setting warm day. It's about 60 degrees. Up at our capital in Concord today it was 62, which set a record. And as I think of records, one of the interesting features of UFOs when they have major sightings or historic sightings down in this area is a very unique feature of the weather changing dramatically before they arrive. And the 1965 September 3rd incident is a good example of that. Just a day or so before, there was severe thundering lightning storms for hours and hours. Lots of electricity in the air. Some think that maybe this was a way of opening a port between dimensions, a portal, by kind of aligning what needs to be to pass through the layer, through any barriers, and creating an opening, a throat, perhaps even through a wormhole. And that end of August, that set records up on Mount Washington. It was snowing up on Mount Washington. Minus degrees. It was one of the coldest times that anybody had recorded in New Hampshire at that time. So severe weather, lots of lightning, big thunder, winds, and that is what preceded the arrival and viewing of that unidentified aerial phenomenon, the big bright red light, as some would term it, a fireball. We've moved in a little bit further, still in a lowland area with a lot of cut-over stumps. adjacent to the power lines, which we can pick up in the distance, and the Great Meadows. Also typical of New Hampshire, a stone wall boundary. A lot of this was dairy country, dairy farms back in the day. As we get in further behind the horse farm, you'll see a lot of different riding trails, because that farm now boards horses, does training of horses, and people keep their horses there and arrive, and then can take a nice ride in the woods on these very, very well marked and very, very nice trails. There's a lot of wildlife in through here. We just passed a bit of coyote scat. The last time we came through, there was a very large track of a very large coyote that had been using the trail. A goodly number of white-tailed deer. Most curiously, the imprint of in the snow of a great blue heron, a good-sized one, who didn't migrate south this year. Some of the Canadian geese and herons seem to be able to eke out a winter living around the Exeter area. One of the trees, we heard a loud noise, was our friend, the pileated woodpecker. A good-sized brute it was indeed. So now we can continue onward, but it gives you an idea how we've gone through the hemlock forest and the cutoff in the lower area. So we're now moving up the first of more of a rolling hill country. You can see we're getting into some nice mixed hardwoods, older hardwoods here. This first one, we're going to come across a ridge and you'll see some nice beaver activity, some large trees they took down. And then we'll finally reach the other hill that has really the desired location of where we think potentially a UFO could hang out in isolation, kind of as long as it wants. And in that area, we kind of use, as people would talk about, either an anti-gravity or some type of secure footing on the craft, a dish-shaped craft that could sit down and then kind of offload and use the hill and the wooded area as a temporary base. I had some good rain along with the 60-degree temperatures. We're part of that East Coast storm that swept up the coast. So it is getting pretty spongy and wet, and these logs are a bit floaty. So we'll see if we can get across here without taking a swim. That waterway, we're at the last ridge here. Coming across that kind of tricky little waterway, which rises up very, very nicely, you will see, as the camera pans around here. And I think we'll find on the other side of the ridge is the so-called Promised Land, UFO haven. So this is the flat hilltop area. Still a lot of white-tailed deer sign as it is. You can see the swamp off to the side of it. You'll soon see what we think may be the holding area. But you can see how flat this is. Somebody could set up, or a group could set up an encampment, camp out here, offload, be out, stretch, walk around, and it is very, very isolated. The horse farm has some riding trails somewhat behind it, but back in 1965, I would doubt you'd be disturbed if you lived out here for many months, unless perhaps a hunter wandered out through, or a trapper. We're also pretty much in behind the horse farm in here. We can see a couple of even larger oaks on the perimeter that the beaver kind of gave up on. I don't know. You probably had to grow a new set of teeth after working on that one. It's high water now. In September, the water would have been a lot lower. So if you look off kind of in the distance at the Catskills down into there, certainly would be an area for a large area for the different space for craft to hover over that with anti-gravity to be, and an area in here that's large and flat where any entities or beings could offload and kind of stretch their legs. That's where we are. We are now directly behind the farmhouse and the colonial house, way up at the western part of that field. We can see the trees and such from out behind where the UFO came up and came over. The owner now, I believe he hails from Ontario, Canada, but he has done a beautiful job of the grounds. You can see how extensive it is, the large barns, the house, off to the left of which in his nice coffee table room, he's got a beautiful copy of John Fuller's The Incident of Exeter. And this is the 50th anniversary year for John Fuller's book, The Incident at Exeter, which sold 500,000 copies and made this site so famous. It's also written about in Raymond Fowler's book, the first investigator on the scene from the NICAP organization, and he wrote a book of interplanetary visitors, I want to say. So again, we can see the fences, the farms in the background. It is a beautiful piece of property. Raymond Fowler, in his book, his book that he wrote, Interplanetary Visitors, also has quite a bit on the incident at Exeter in it as well. So we're looking down from the top of Shaw's Hill across Route 150 at those power lines. Get a good look of the great meadows out beyond, and the whole part of those high tension lines. Now they swing across the road over to our left here, where we are up at the top of a place called Shaw's Hill. This is pretty much, it might have been a drumlin, but it's certainly through farming, very, very flat up here now. And it's very significant in local UFO history because in John Fuller's book, other sightings, people have seen UFOs land on this field at night, and the curious part of it that they see is they see lights, like a runway or an area at an airport. As we pan this one last time, and you see the flatness like that. In fact, at night, I've been up here with Thomas Muscarello, Norman's brother, and we like to look at Orion's belt up there. But some say there's a port or a UFO window right at this location, so it is pretty significant, probably the most significant field area with the power lines that get adjacent to it on the New Hampshire seacoast. So as I finish up, I hope you've kind of enjoyed this part of the local history. If you like that, we may do another one. We're thinking of some graveside history and going to visit Betty and Bonnie Hill's grave over in Kingston, Thomas Muscarello, Gene Bertram, and David Hunt's over in Exeter with a little bit of the history. We're not far, really, as a crow flies through where Betty Hill grew up. It's another significant part of the tie-in of this very special area. So we hope if there's the interest of this, then we will kind of continue to do these little jaunts out along the wayside and for your viewing pleasure. Thanks.